The first time I realized my neighbor was using my driveway like his own personal turnaround lane, I honestly thought maybe it was an accident. By the second week, I knew it wasn't. By the third week, I was standing in my kitchen at 6:45 every morning waiting to hear his tires roll across my concrete, like some kind of daily insult I couldn't quite explain to anybody else without sounding crazy. See, that's the thing about neighborhood problems. They always sound small when you say them out loud. My neighbor keeps using my driveway. Doesn't exactly sound like the beginning of a war story. But people who've lived next to entitled folks know it's never about the driveway. It's about the way somebody slowly teaches you they don't see you as a person. I live in a little subdivision outside of Columbus, one of those older neighborhoods built back in the late 70s where every house looks slightly different because people have had 40 years to mess with them. My place sits on a corner lot where Briarwood Lane curves into Ashcrest Drive, and because of the angle, my driveway opens up like this perfect little half circle. Delivery vans use it by accident sometimes. Teenagers learning to drive use it too. Most people wave if they realize what they did. Normal human behavior. Not this guy. His name was Derek Holloway. Mid-40s maybe, always dressed like he was 2 minutes away from a regional sales meeting. Crisp polos, shiny shoes. One of those Bluetooth earpieces that somehow made him look even more smug. Drove a silver company sedan with dealership branding plastered across the back bumper like a rolling business card. Every morning, exactly 6:45, the same routine. Engine starts. Reverse lights come on. He backs halfway out of his driveway, cuts hard across my property, swings through my driveway in one clean motion, then disappears down Ashcrest toward the interstate. Every single morning. At first I tried not to care. I really did. I told myself maybe I was becoming one of those bitter homeowners who yells at kids for stepping on grass. But then little things started stacking up in my head. The guy waved at everybody else on the street. Miss Clara across from me got a big smile every morning. The retired firefighter down the block got a head nod. Even the college kid with the obnoxiously loud Mustang got acknowledgement. Me? Nothing. Derek would look right through me like I was part of the landscaping. And weirdly enough, that got under my skin more than the driveway. Because disrespect is a funny thing. Most of the time it's not loud. It's quiet, casual, repetitive. It's somebody showing you, over and over again, that your comfort ranks somewhere below their convenience. One Saturday morning I was out front pressure washing the driveway when Derek came rolling back from Starbucks. He slowed down just enough to avoid splashing a puddle onto my shoes, cracked his window maybe 2 inches and said, "Careful there, wouldn't want to wear the concrete out." Then he laughed at his own joke and drove off. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not rage exactly, more like clarity. I stopped seeing him as absent-minded. This wasn't some harmless habit anymore. The guy enjoyed it. He liked the fact that nobody challenged him. Some people treat boundaries like electric fences. They keep pushing until they finally feel a shock. So I tried being polite first. I wrote a note. Short, calm, respectful. "Hey Derek, would appreciate if you stopped cutting through my driveway every morning. Thanks, Nate." That was it. No threats. No attitude. I walked it over myself and slid it beneath his front door. The next afternoon, I watched him pick it up from his porch while I was mowing my lawn. He read the whole thing, looked directly at me from across the street, and shrugged. Just one slow little shrug like the entire conversation bored him. Then he crumpled the note in one hand and went back inside. I remember standing there with the mower still running, staring at his front door, and feeling this strange heat crawl up the back of my neck because suddenly it wasn't about property anymore. It was about humiliation, about a guy deciding he could casually dismiss me in front of my own home. That night my friend Leon came by to help me move some old shelving into the garage, and while we were digging around behind stacks of paint cans and busted yard tools, he spotted my old truck sitting beneath a dusty tarp. Now that truck was a disaster. A faded yellow 1994 Ford F-250 work truck I used years earlier for a landscaping business. Passenger mirror cracked clean through, rust chewing along the wheel wells, bumper dented so badly it looked like somebody had kicked it with steel-toe boots for fun. The thing barely looked road legal, but it was road legal. Leon pulled the tarp back, stared at it for a second, then looked at me with this slow grin spreading across his face. "Oh no," he said. "You're about to become the villain in somebody else's story." And honestly, that was the first time I smiled all week. The next morning I got up earlier than usual, poured myself stale gas station coffee from the pot I'd forgotten to clean the night before, and walked out into the cold while the whole neighborhood still had that blue-gray silence right before sunrise. The truck started on the third try with this ugly coughing sound that probably violated several environmental laws, but eventually the engine settled into that deep rattling idle I remembered from years ago when I used to haul mulch and broken retaining stones all over Franklin County for $12 an hour. I backed it slowly toward the mouth of my driveway and parked it perfectly along my property line. Not an inch into the street. Not enough space for a clean turnaround anymore either. Just a giant rusted middle finger sitting exactly where Derek liked to cut through. Then I went back inside and waited. 6:45 hit right on schedule. Brake lights glowed red through my kitchen window. And stayed there. I swear to God, it was one of the most satisfying things I've ever seen. Derek just sat there inside his sedan, completely frozen, like his brain couldn't process the fact that another human being had interrupted his routine. You could almost feel the confusion turning into irritation through the glass. Finally, his driver's side door cracked open, and he leaned halfway out to stare at the truck. Then came the horn. One short beep. I laughed out loud right there in my kitchen. He beeped again, longer this time. Still didn't move. Eventually, he tried squeezing around the opposite side of the street and immediately scraped his front bumper against the curb hard enough that I physically winced. The sound echoed straight through the quiet neighborhood, like somebody dragging a shovel across concrete. And then he peeled off toward the interstate. 12 minutes later than usual. Not that I was timing him or anything. Okay, I was timing him. Here's the part nobody really tells you about petty neighborhood wars. Once they start, both people become weirdly obsessed. It turns into this silent psychological chess match where every tiny detail suddenly matters. Over the next week, I started noticing Derek spiraling in ways I honestly hadn't expected. He began leaving earlier and earlier every morning, trying different angles around the truck. Sometimes he'd pull halfway into the opposite lane just to make the turn work. Once he nearly clipped a recycling bin. Another time he backed so aggressively he almost hit Mrs. Delgado's mailbox. And every single morning, there sat my ugly old Ford like a retired bouncer guarding the entrance. The neighborhood started noticing too. You could feel it. People slowed down during dog walks. Curtains moved. Folks lingered at mailboxes longer than usual, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever weird suburban standoff was unfolding between me and Derek Holloway. One afternoon, Miss Clara shuffled over while I was trimming hedges and quietly asked, "So, how long's the truck staying there?" I said, "Depends how attached Derek is to my driveway." That woman laughed so hard she had to grab my shoulder. Turns out I wasn't the only person tired of Derek. Apparently, he'd spent years acting like the unofficial king of Briarwood Lane, parking halfway across sidewalks, complaining about basketball noise from kids, calling HOA over garbage cans left out too long while his own camper trailer sat crooked beside his garage for months. The driveway thing was just the first time somebody pushed back publicly, and Derek hated it. By week 2, the guy looked exhausted. One rainy Thursday morning, he caught me outside dragging trash bins back toward the garage and finally walked over. No smile. No fake friendliness. Just this tight jaw like he'd been rehearsing the conversation in his car. "You proving some kind of point here?" he asked. I leaned against the bin handle. Thought the truck looked nice there. "It's making it difficult for me to get out." I shrugged. "Damn, that sounds inconvenient." The look he gave me after that, man. Pure venom. "You know," he said quietly, "most neighbors try to help each other." I almost laughed in his face. Interesting timing for that speech, Derek. For a second I thought he might actually snap. His nostrils flared, fingers flexing against his coffee cup, eyes darting toward the truck like he wanted to physically shove it out of the way himself. But then something changed. He recalculated. Guys like Derek always do. They don't explode unless they know they'll win. So instead he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You really want to turn this into a thing?" And there it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not neighborly frustration. A threat. Small enough to deny later. Clear enough to understand in the moment. I stepped forward too. "No," I said. "You turned it into a thing when you decided my property belonged to you." For a couple seconds we just stood there in the rain listening to water drip off the gutters. Then Derek gave me that same little shrug from before. Only this time it looked less confident. "That weekend things escalated. My security camera caught him standing at the edge of my driveway around 11:30 Saturday night, staring at the truck with his hands on his hips. Didn't touch it. Didn't vandalize anything. Just stood there thinking, like a guy trying to solve a math problem that kept humiliating him. Monday morning, I noticed fresh tire marks cutting across the edge of my lawn, where he'd attempted some insane wide-angle maneuver before sunrise. Tore up the grass, too. That irritated me more than I expected, because now he was throwing a tantrum. I spent half the afternoon reseating those tire grooves while thinking about how ridiculous the whole thing had become. Two grown men locked in this silent suburban Cold War over a patch of concrete. And yet underneath all of it was something weirdly personal now. Derek couldn't stand losing control. And if I'm being honest, I couldn't stand the idea of backing down after finally standing up for myself. That's probably the real reason these situations spiral. Pride fills the space where communication should have happened months earlier. Then came Friday. I'd just gotten home from the hardware store when someone knocked on my front door. Not pounded. Knocked. Soft enough that I almost didn't hear it over the football game playing in the living room. I opened the door, and there stood Derek looking like absolute hell. Tie loosened. Eyes bloodshot. Tiny twitch in his jaw. For the first time since I'd met the man, he actually looked human. He glanced past me toward the kitchen like he didn't want the neighbors spotting him on my porch. Then he said quietly, "Can we talk for a second?" I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Derek rubbed the back of his neck before speaking again. "Look, this thing with the truck, it's becoming a problem." I folded my arms. "Seems manageable to me." "No, seriously." He exhaled hard. "I got written up this week." That surprised me enough I didn't answer immediately. He kept going. "The company tracks our routes and departure times. They noticed I've been late to client calls 3 times this month already." He pointed vaguely toward the street. "And I messed up my bumper trying to avoid your damn truck." There was anger in his voice again at the end, but underneath it sat something else. Embarrassment. And weirdly, I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered the shrug. The note crumpled in his hand. The months of acting like I didn't exist unless he needed something. Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded stack of cash. "I'll pay you to move it." That sentence hung between us in the cold air like both of us understood something important had just happened. Because once money enters a conflict like this, the truth comes out. It was never about convenience anymore. It was about ownership. About who got to decide what my property was worth. And standing there on my porch looking at Derek Holloway, finally forced to ask permission for the very thing he'd been taking for free all year, I realized I had absolutely no intention of making this easy for him. I looked down at the cash in Derek's hand and almost laughed because suddenly the whole situation felt surreal. 3 weeks earlier, this guy wouldn't even acknowledge me when I waved across the street. And now he was standing on my porch at night, trying to rent access to my driveway, like it was premium parking at a stadium. Funny how fast arrogance turns into negotiation when inconvenience finally costs somebody something. I didn't take the money. Instead, I said, "Nah." Just that one word. Derek blinked at me. "What do you mean, nah?" "I mean, I don't want cash." The irritation came back immediately. "You serious right now?" "Very." He stared at me for a second like he was trying to figure out whether I was screwing with him. Honestly, part of me was. But another part wanted something else too. I wanted acknowledgement. Proof. I wanted this guy to understand that using somebody's property without permission wasn't some harmless little shortcut anymore. So I told him, "If we're doing this, we do it properly. Venmo only." He frowned. "Why?" "Because I like records." Man, the silence after that was beautiful. You could actually see the humiliation hit him. Not because of the money itself. Derek clearly had money. But because digital payments create evidence. A history. Something repeatable. Cash disappears. Venmo turns a favor into an arrangement. And he knew it. For a second, I honestly thought he'd walk away. His jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle twitch near his temple. But then his shoulders sagged a little, like whatever pride he still had left was losing a fight against reality. "What's your username?" he muttered. I gave it to him. 10 seconds later, my phone buzzed. $200. I looked down at the notification while Derek stood there in silence waiting for me to say something. Finally, I nodded once toward the driveway. "Truck will be gone tomorrow morning." He gave this stiff little nod back and turned to leave, but before he walked off the porch, he stopped and said something that honestly stuck with me longer than the money ever did. "You know, you could have just talked to me." I actually laughed. Not loud. Not cruel. Just genuine disbelief. Then I said, I did. He didn't answer after that. Just walked back across the street beneath the yellow glow of the streetlights, looking smaller somehow. Less like the polished sales guy everybody saw every morning, and more like a tired middle-aged man who'd spent too long assuming the world would keep bending around him forever. The next day, I moved the truck back behind the garage. And just like that, the war was over. At least officially. But here's where the story gets weird. The first of the next month rolled around, and at 7:12 in the morning my phone buzzed again. Another Venmo payment from Derek. $200. No message attached. I remember staring at the screen confused as hell because we never discussed making it recurring. I walked to the front window, and sure enough, his sedan was gone already. Clean exit. No turnaround through my driveway. No drama. Just a payment. At first I thought maybe he sent it accidentally. But then it happened again the following month. Same amount. Same quiet notification before 8 a.m. By month 3, I finally walked across the street and knocked on his door. Derek answered wearing gym shorts and an old Ohio State sweatshirt, looking genuinely startled to see me standing there. I held up my phone. You know you don't actually have to keep sending these, right? He looked at the screen, then at me. And for the first time since I'd known him, he smiled like a normal person. Yeah, he said. I know. I waited for more explanation, but he just leaned against the doorframe for a second before finally shrugging again. Except this time the shrug felt different. Smaller. Human. Then he said, Truth is, after that first payment, I realized something. What's that? I'd been acting like the neighborhood owed me things. That caught me off guard. He looked past me toward the street while he talked, almost embarrassed by the words coming out of his mouth. My dad used to do that, he said quietly. Take little shortcuts through people's property, borrow stuff without asking, park wherever he wanted. Always said people worried too much about boundaries. He gave this dry little laugh. Guess I turned into him without noticing. I didn't really know what to say to that, because suddenly the whole conflict looked different in my head. Smaller maybe. Sadder too. A lot of people inherit entitlement the same way other people inherit old furniture or bad knees. They carry it around so long they stop seeing it. Derek rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly and added, The payments are kind of a reminder. A reminder of what? That somebody finally told me no. There was something strangely honest about the way he said it. No sarcasm. No ego left in it. Just truth. After that, things between us changed slowly. Not overnight. We didn't become best friends or anything cheesy like that. But he started waving. Started helping Miss Clara carry groceries sometimes. Even apologized to the Delgado family about the mailbox incident. The neighborhood noticed. People always notice when somebody softens. And every month for almost a year, the Venmo payments kept coming. Eventually, I sent the last one back. No explanation. A few minutes later, Derek texted me for the first time ever. You sure? I replied, yeah, I think you got the point. He reacted with a thumbs up emoji, and that was that. Now every once in a while I'll catch him backing carefully out of his own driveway the hard way, taking the extra 30 seconds instead of cutting across somebody else's space. And honestly, it still makes me smile a little. Not because I won, but because sometimes the only thing standing between a selfish person and a decent one is finally meeting a boundary that doesn't move. And I know some people listening to this are probably thinking I acted petty, maybe even ridiculous over something so small. Maybe you think Derek was harmless. Maybe you think I should have let it go. Honestly, maybe. But I also think neighborhoods only work when people respect each other's space. Not just property lines, but the invisible lines too. Respect, courtesy, basic acknowledgement that other people exist. So now I'm curious. What would you have done in my position? Would you have blocked the driveway too? Or was I completely out of line? And more importantly, at what point does being neighborly turn into letting people walk all over you? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I guarantee this story's gonna split people right down the middle.